kind of job you wanted to talk about today? Did you just want this to be a basic screening interview, Jim? How did you?
Basic screening interview.
Okay.
Basic screening interview.
All right.
And I think I have something lined up, which I knew about all along, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We're starting a Boys and Girls Club in Geneva.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see, I'm actively involved in the community, too much so. In fact, my wife says, you know,
I
you
was
spend
wondering
so
how you
much
got all
time.
this stuff done.
And she says, you know, you ought to get paid
I was
for it.
looking at page 3. I was thinking to myself, how does he get all this stuff done?
Incredible. I usually try to get involved with 2 things during the year.
Mm-hmm.
And because I've been unemployed, it's been 3 things.
Yeah, right. Well, they figure you've got time on your hands.
Yes. So what they're willing to do, the Boys and Girls Club that we're forming, we received a $1.4 million grant to build the Boys and Girls Club. We've submitted bids, so work is in progress. It can open up as early as May or as late as September. Meanwhile, they need a gopher to get things organized before they
since you have time.
Publicize for right, the director right there.
I got it.
Jim, that's yours if you want it.
There you go. There you go.
So I said, yeah, so you make me part-time, you give me this little chump change. Yeah, I said, okay.
Give me a nice title.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jim, I'm Paul Segas from Career Development Services. Nice to meet you.
Good. And I'm Jim Henderson from Geneva, New York.
Jim, as you know, I got your resume from Mary Reese the other day, and she thought we could get together and chat a little bit.
Right.
So why don't you just tell me a little bit about yourself and your background, if you would?
A little bit about myself and my background. Well, my name is Jim Henderson. I'm from Geneva, New York. Originally from Philadelphia, just so you see that there's a contrast between the metropolitan and urban center and sort of a small city type environment. I sort of had a very unusual educational experience in that I first went to college on a basketball scholarship to South Carolina State College, and I flunked out. No, that's not on there. And even back there in the late 50s, early 60s, you had to hit the books once in a while to keep that athletic scholarship.
Right.
Well, I had to learn the hard way, which most folks have to go to school of hard knocks. And I was drafted by Uncle Sam, stationed up here at Seneca Army Depot, right outside of Geneva, military policeman. And that's how I got way from Philadelphia all the way up here to Geneva, New York. After being in Geneva, I met a local Genevan.
Those things happen.
Married, and the rest is history. She tried to convince me, after spending all her life there in Geneva, that the grass was green on the other side, and I wanted to convince her, after traveling as far south as Florida and as far west as California, the grass is not green on the other side of the fence, particularly if you're thinking about raising a family. And Geneva is an excellent environment to do that, comparatively speaking. We have right now a 32-year-old son and a 28-year-old daughter, who I think are very successful. One's an aspiring thespian, and he's been out to Seattle, Washington, to their repertory theater and starred in 6 Degrees of Separation. He just returned from the Alliance Theater in Atlanta, doing the American Angels Part 1 and Perestroika. And now he's auditioned for, I think it was a couple Shakespearean plays, one that will be performed at the Lincoln Center. And he's also played there before in an opera. So he's brought some culture to our lives. Have a beautiful daughter who's 28, extremely bright, and unfortunately that combination does not lend itself to getting a good man. She sort of intimidates him. After graduating from Boston College, she went on to New York City, and she left there at the age of 26, making $74,000 a year as a senior budget analyst for the Office of Management and Budget to pursue her graduate degree. And of all places, Syracuse. And I said, why Syracuse, hon? You want to be close to mom and dad? She said, no. It happens to have the #1 program in the country. And I said, I didn't know Syracuse had the #1 of anything. Well, I happened to look in, and she was right. It's the Maxwell School there, so she graduated with an MPA degree. And she's now in Washington, and found out that despite her additional education and experience, she was a non-essential. So she was one of the few 800,000 federal employees who were furloughed, in other words, given an extended vacation at taxpayers' expense. something to the tune of, what was it, 125 million a day? So I happened to ask, I said, hon, it's incredible, my arithmetic is all messed up. You left a $74,000 job to get additional year and a half education, additional degree, off to Washington, and then make 54. And her sarcastic response and remark to that was, Dad, you often told me, one way to measure success is that your income might equal your age. She says, when I was making 74, I felt like an old woman. I wanted to make around 54 to see what you felt like. Well, needless to say, it's zero now.
So tell me about you and your professional career.
My professional career.
You got out of the military.
Got out of the military and started working, I think, in the business sector. Started off at Halls Manufacturing Company. And I don't...
What's the name of it?
Halls Manufacturing Company. They were a subsidiary, Smith Corona, out of Cortland, New York.
Yes.
And we made the typewriter keys.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, after 2 weeks, I was on a fast track, and it made me supervisor of the trimming department. But unfortunately, it was about a year and a half there to only discover I could leave there and go work at American Can and chunk in my white shirt and nice tie and make 20 cents an hour more than I was making there as a supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to work at American Can, and I think I was there for about 3 years before I got caught in this big layoff.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I were about ready to look for a home, and I said, hon, let's look. 3 years, the job looks secure. And they went back as far as 9 years seniority. They laid off over 300 people.
Mm-hmm.
So I have some experience in this, but you can see that's been quite a while ago.
Yep, yep.
Well, while I was there, I went on to Auburn Community College, it was
Mm-hmm.
called at the time, got my associate degree. There was a position that was available at the college, but it was contingent upon me getting my BA degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And I should have officially graduated from Hobart in '73. But I was acting director of the EI program, supposed to be for, until they hired someone, it was for 1 year. And then when they made me from a part-time counselor to full-time, then I couldn't keep up with those 3 courses a term was on the
Right.
term system.
Right.
And I graduated in '75. And continued to grow since then, attending
Mhm.
workshops, putting on workshops, etc.
Okay.
So it's primarily been in the educational sector, both in voluntary things and also as a profession and career.
Okay. So tell me about your experiences at Hobart in terms of being a counselor, being the assistant dean and dean of the colleges. Tell me about some
The
of those.
experiences at Hobart and William Smith were very rewarding and fulfilling. I think I was very fortunate to go to an institution that could respect not only your educational background, but were very good at allowing people to grow and to branch out. And as a result, I think I showed the little vision, the little leadership by seeing that what I was doing with students who were in a higher education opportunity program,
Mm-hmm.
Students in general could benefit. So I think it was about for a full year, I went around and hit almost every dorm on campus, and I did a 2-hour workshop on reading and study skills. And I had some provisos there. If it was more than 30 people, then I'd come back another night.
Mm-hmm.
If it was less than 15, then I'd combine floors. Kept very accurate records, particularly the students who followed up, who needed the services. And consequently, that next year submitted a proposal to the deans to start a developmental learning center. And it was initially funded in part by the state education department, and then from there we branched out and we involved all the students.
Mm-hmm.
I think one
So
of
that
those,
was your idea, the developmental learning center was your idea?
right?
You put it into proposal form and got them to buy off on it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, I created my own job, and that's what I meant about they were very good at allowing talented people. That if your ideas were good, they certainly would allow you to implement them.
So how did you measure success of the developmental learning center?
How did I measure success? Well, as you may or may not know, Hobart College in William Smith,
Mm-hmm.
very selective institution.
Mm-hmm.
Out of 3,480 colleges and universities in the United States, we at that time were the 52nd most expensive and the 68th most selective.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, students who entered we had very few what they call false positives. That is, students who, by all the criteria we use to admit them, shouldn't have too many problems or difficulties passing their
Right.
academic courses.
Mhm.
But we always get a few.
Yeah.
And also, we happen to have hit upon a few students who, after being required to withdraw from the colleges for a period of a year for academic reasons, made us aware that they had a learning disability.
Mhm.
And I thought that was more or less a reaction
Mhm.
rather than some proactive steps. So I also started the steps and developed the protocol for once students were admitted and there was no need to not be honest and forthright with us. Uh, they could fill out a form, both the parents and the students, indicating they had a learning disability. It had no effect on admissions, they already admitted,
Mhm.
but it allowed us to set in motion some interventional steps with the type of help that they might need. And that program's still going on, and we've expanded from just a few students. And when I left the college, we had something like, through all 4 classes, something like 85 students with learning disabilities. In fact, the 2 groups of students who had the highest retention rate were students who were in our HEOP program, who weren't supposed to do as well as other students, and we attributed that to additional supportive tutoring, plus our summer academic orientation program, and also the additional assistance that students with learning differences were getting. And they were the 2 groups that had the highest retention. Although, I must say, Hobart and William Smith had a pretty high retention rate
Overall.
compared to other colleges and universities, the national average, so to speak. William Smith was up there usually anywhere between 79 and 84, 85%. Hobart was close by, and they were somewhere between 76 and 80%. Our students in the Higher Education Opportunity Program were up there in the 80s, and they could extend all the way up there to 86, 87%. And the same thing with students who had learning differences. So I'm pretty proud of that track record.
You said on your resume, some couple of things caught my attention. Implemented a supplemental instruction unit for a high-risk course, Psych 210,
Mm-hmm.
quantitative methods,
Right.
reducing the failure rate from 33% to 8%. Tell me about that.
Right. Supplemental instruction was started out in Kansas by a young woman who was faced with the problem of helping students succeed in college. She wanted to come up with something unique and novel. And what she did, and it's quite different from your regular tutoring program, in that it's very cost effective. You identify courses that have high risks, and what you do is you hire and train 1 or 2 students who have had the course before, recommended by the professor, who literally take the course over again. But what they do in the process is that they take notes, and they meet a minimum of 3 times a week. It's all voluntary, unlike tutoring. Students volunteer to come in 3 times a week, minimum. And they meet with this particular supplemental instructor. We call him an aide. Now, this person's sole responsibility is to really use a collaborative approach to work with students. In other words, she or he has taken notes, and they review the notes. But it's not one of these things you can copy my notes. It lends itself to, I think, the acknowledgement of different learning styles of students. And quite often when you have a group of 3 to 5 students, invariably you're going to find some students who didn't get something from one way, but here's another student explaining something, and wow, it just clicks. So that's the novel thing about that. They're also in the process of going over notes, review the assignments to see students' understanding of things. And by doing this 3 times a week and in preparation for any type of exams, what I noticed there was the more frequency of students attending the SI meetings, the higher their grade, and it literally panned right out there. The fewer, then the lower their grade. Now you can see the number there of the students involved there, and people were so impressed with that. But at that time too, I had to explain that it was cost effective in the sense that if I had students come over to, at that time, Center for Academic Support Services, requesting individual tutoring, you could see right now 3 to 4 times a week for an individual tutor for 4 to 5 students. This basically paid for itself because it reached a larger number of students. And when they felt that they had some difficulty, they could participate. But the selling point, I think, is that it was all voluntary, and also it really showed the results immediately, both on quizzes, performance on quizzes, and also your major exams.
Was there any thought given to changing the nature of the course, given that it seems to be identified as a course that a lot of people have difficulty with?
In what sense?
Well, it apparently was quantitatively oriented, according to what I see.
Right.
Did they give any thought to, doing some different things around training and presenting the material if that many people were going to have difficulty with it?
Yeah, but unfortunately, it's like, and I don't want to say this in a pejorative way, but quite often you have professors who teach, and part of their teaching style reflects their mentors, who are their graduate professors or undergraduate professors. They're not very amendable to change. I think the best thing that came out of this was the acknowledgement in very overt and subtle ways that there was a need to do things a little differently. Some professors, I think, would be receptive, but I just have that one model to go by.
Right.
And this professor had been teaching that course, oh my gosh, for years, for literally years. And there were a few others that taught it, and they even had a higher attrition rate than this professor did. But it made him aware that it wasn't just a question of pushing the pencil, which many of them say, the problem is you're just not working on enough problems.
Right.
And I think it goes beyond that. It's not only that, but it's reaching the level of understanding that I think in a setting that was less traumatic, intense, students sort of opened up a little more.
Tell me what you think your greatest strengths are.
My greatest strengths. I think my greatest strengths are the fact that I'm a team player. I'm very open-minded. I think I can be a visionist. I think I can effectively problem solve. I'm very creative, analytical, and I have a good bedside manner.
Okay. What do you mean by good bedside manner?
I seem, as I've given feedback from people, I seem to make them feel at ease. And it was interesting that you asked the question that way too, because it was a young man who we were interviewing at the high school for a position as a math physics teacher. And obviously a very talented young man, and we knew at the time that we were competing with some schools in Brighton, and I think it was Henrietta, and said, how can we get this guy, I said, one of the things, we're not going to wait and submit 2 or 3 candidates to the principal and the superintendent of school and let them fudge around making up their mind and lose this young man. I said, let's all go with one individual, this young man. And I, through consensus, got them to agree with that. The name was submitted, and we hired that young man immediately. I happen to be over there because I'm also chairing the high school site council, and I'm also chairing the grading committee. I happened to walk out, and a young man walked by me and he spoke, and all of a sudden I'm standing there talking to one of the people on the site council, and he pulls his car around and he goes, aren't you the gentleman that was interviewing me? I said, oh, that's right, yes. He said, I want to thank you so much for really putting me and everyone else at ease. And I went, oh, I did that? And he said, yes, I was pretty uptight right there, and you said something that just broke the ice and made me relax and everybody else relax. And I seem to have a knack for doing that, sometimes unbeknownst to me.
You said, now, to summarize what you said, you're team player, open-minded, visionary, problem-solving, analytical, good bedside manner.
Leadership, yeah, I have to get leadership in there.
Can you give me an example of one of your accomplishments that you think illustrates the majority of those traits?
Well, yeah, one of the accomplishments, I think, through my initiative, just the idea that I felt there were more students who were having difficulty at the colleges than both the colleges and students were willing to admit. And that bore itself out when I took it upon myself, uh, in addition to fulfilling some of my own responsibilities at the time as a counselor, to go back in the evening for 2 to 3 hours for almost an entire year to demonstrate that students really could benefit from acquiring some knowledge of how to develop effective reading and study skills. That would be one thing, and as a result, the proposal was written,
Right.
and that's still now in force.
Mhm.
Although I might add, people say it's not run as effectively as when I was there. Now that's one thing. The other thing, we had a summer academic orientation program.
Mhm.
And I think it was 1987, the director of the Office of Minority Affairs and the HEOP program resigned unexpectedly in the middle of our academic year, February. I think that made the third or fourth time they asked me to fill in.
Mhm.
So not only did I fill in over there in that office, I thought we would have hired someone before our summer program began, and we didn't. We also, at that same time, happened to have the largest number of students coming in. Our previous high for our summer program was 25 students. It was 39.
Mhm.
And I learned an awful lot about myself. Number one, that I had an ego, because I should have hired someone for the reading and study skills course, but I felt no one could do it as good as I. Therefore, I not only taught the course, but ran the whole summer program. And I learned something very valuable from that experience. I had been the type of individual that said to himself, if you want something done right, you do it yourself.
Mhm.
Regardless of how long it takes. Why I couldn't. I'd been asking for a 30-hour day, and it wasn't any forthcoming. Consequently, I learned how to relegate and delegate and have faith in people that they could do a good job if you let them have their what's that, reign, so to speak.
Mhm. We talked a little bit about what you thought your strengths were. What do you think your areas for improvement might be?
Oh, I love that. You must have been reading. I also did, I'm not even sure it's on there. One of the things about doing an evaluation, I mean, doing a resume, it makes you recall all the things you've done. One of the things that I have to get in there, I'm not sure it's in there, but I also was charged several years ago to develop an evaluation tool to evaluate all the people that we perceive as middle managers, the deans, etc.
Mhm.
Consequently, I did that, and one of the things that I had on there, that we have to acknowledge we're all human, and we all have strengths, and we all have areas needing to improve.
Mhm.
I tried to stay away from weaknesses.
Weaknesses, yeah.
So I noticed you're very in tune to that. But also in the course of working with students and in the area of career planning
Mhm.
and how to effectively interview.
That's right.
One of the things that I told them, never be lulled into the trap of, well, what do you think your weaknesses are? And allow them to exclude you based on what you say.
Mhm.
So one of the safe things, let me stop, I forgot this camera's rolling. One of the safe things to say, and this actually happens to be true, I think an area that I needed proven, I sort of alluded to it moments ago, is I'm a perfectionist.
Mhm.
And that is the biggest area, because that can sometimes be very time consuming and draining. And although I don't think I've experienced it, could ultimately lead to burnout.
Mhm. Any other areas for improvement, Jim?
There are, but what I've done, whatever area or career I've pursued, I've always kept abreast of any changes in the field, any literature. So I am aware that there's always things that I have to know
Mhm.
to grow as a person and to be a more effective person in the job that I happen to be hired for. So when you say, are there any areas? Sure. And that's something that I acknowledge and I'm up with.
Can you give me an example of when your work may have been criticized, where people didn't think you did as well as you might have done?
Yes, yes.
Can you tell me about that?
This was in the area of tutoring.
Mm-hmm.
We had a tutoring program at the colleges, and tutoring came from two sources. We had our students in the higher education opportunity program that by mandate, state mandate, were
Okay.
eligible for tutoring,
Mm-hmm.
different source of funding. And we also had students who might need help that went beyond the help that was given to students from the course instructor that would come over to the Center for Academic Support Service and request a tutor. I want to be consistent there. Therefore, one of the things that we were set up to do is to make sure that tutoring was not in any way to supplement hard work, good study habits, etc., but was to supplement it, not supplant it. Consequently, there was one director that came in for the HEOP program that felt if any of his students were sent over there to CAS, we should find them a tutor immediately. On the other hand, whatever policy was implemented, we had to be very consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a philosophical difference that I think we had ironed out. The other thing I think was being politically astute and sensitive to the fact that there were others, particularly in the faculty area,
Mm-hmm.
who, let me jump to the science. We have an excellent pre-med program at the college. In fact, it was a guaranteed 100% placement
In
Cat-
medical school.
in medical school. The catch was if you're recommended by the pre-med committee.
Mm-hmm.
To give you an idea, out of 500 or so incoming first-year students, approximately half might be aspiring to get into medical school.
Mm-hmm.
After the end of one term of science courses, cut that in half.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of 1 year, cut that half in half.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of 4
25%.
years, you're talking about maybe 14 to 15 students.
Mm-hmm.
But they also, because I think, and this was a hidden motive, they did not want any students in their courses to receive tutoring unless they okayed it. Students were petrified because of the smallness of the campus and the interaction of teachers or professors in the science area, biology, chemistry, etc., that if students came over, it was one of these things, please, Dean Anderson, don't tell Professor so-and-so I'm requesting a tutor.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, why? Well, if they think I'm getting a tutoring, then that will form an impression of
They won't
them.
recommend you.
And wow, so this was something where I was at odds with academic division.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just a department, a division
Mm-hmm.
that for whatever reasons, unwritten,
Mm-hmm.
wanted to, number one, make sure that they had first opportunity to work with students. I had no problem with that, but if students often told me if they didn't understand things in a lecture, going to the professor didn't help any because it was the same lingua franca, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So I did get some tutoring for the students. The other thing I wanted to make sure that students really needed, in other words, it wasn't a student that was capable of doing a work on his or her own. So they said, well,
Yeah.
I don't have to pay for it. Let me go ahead and get a tutor. Because again, I was very budget conscious. The other thing that I wasn't aware of at the time, we hired a person to come in and start a writing program, who also, unbeknownst to me, wanted to take over tutoring because she had some vision of actually offering a course for tutoring. And it would be not only tutoring in general, but specifically for the writing component.
Right.
So there was a little scenario going over on the side that I wasn't aware of until that became fully blossomed. So yes, there were some things there, and I actually had what I thought was a very good friend of mine mention something in the faculty meeting that was a problem with tutoring, and the dean brought this to my attention, and I said, what did he say? And he says, well, I didn't have a tutor on file, and I had a standard letter that I sent to the professor that we don't have anyone from this particular course. Would you refer some names, and if none are available, could you identify someone in the course that might be able to help out? Well, I confronted this gentleman And what it boiled down to was, Jim, nothing personal. All right, but there's some faculty who believe that what you do ought to be under the faculty and not the deans. So that was another element, and that eventually happened. The provost took over that whole operation, and the rest is history. He really wanted somebody with a PhD degree in there. And it's so interesting, after all that and looking at candidates, they found out and discovered that what they had was excellent.
You've been there a long time.
24 years, yes.
So how did you feel about having to leave that organization?
I think, you know, I often told students that there well, several years ago I felt a little inadequate working with them, particularly when they experienced some type of trauma in their lives, like the death of a loved one, because I could sympathize but not empathize until my grandfather passed away. And then I could really understand what they were going through. Well, my mother since passed away and my grandmother's passed away. So I know all the classical symptoms of death and dying. That's what it was like, leaving the college after 24 years. The first stage is denial. And I still might be in that stage of denial. I'm not sure. I think a number of people just find it utterly amazing that with all my relevant experience, they could let me go. So in all honesty, I'm still trying to deal with it.
Jim, what kind of job would you be looking for now? What would be your ideal
well, my experience is in education.
Right.
But then again, ideally, any profession that, or job or career that would tap both my experiences and my strengths, and would also allow me to grow in that position. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a people person. So anything working with people. And I think I'm a little selfish too, because when I work with people, and I'm an educator too, so as a component of learning there and teaching there, I see results. It's sort of like a variable ratio reinforcement with the classical conditioning. It's not sort of every 10 times. It varies, but it's there enough to sort of keep me going.
I've been asking you a lot of questions, Jim. Any questions you want to ask me?
Yes. How much does your job pay?
Well, what kind of salary are you looking for? Good question.
Oh, gosh. I tell you, I've not lowered necessarily my aspirations, but considering where I've been, I'm really looking for 35 or higher. What I'm coming to perhaps accept is the fact that there are a lot of jobs out there, and they're entry-level jobs, and a lot of them require a master's degree, and I was just appalled at the salaries that they're starting people off with. But I guess you're not in an institution for 24 years unless you get up there pretty high in salary.
It's good meeting you, Jim.
Same here.
Anything else I can do for you today?
No, but your coffee's been great, and you have me so relaxed that I think it must have been 10 minutes into this little interview that I realized that the camera was on.
You made a comment there about it.
Oh, God. Thanks, Paul.
All right, I'm going to shut this off for a minute. So how anything that would indicate...
I'm sorry, placing you as the...
Yeah, you may have misunderstood the question,
did,
and I'll give you some leeway on that.
I had a little trouble in the dual objective roles, yourself as part of
Right,
career development,
right.
and yourself as interviewing me for a position. That's all, just kind of what you might call a blurred image
Right,
in terms of objectivity. Your strength comes across very powerful in your critique, but I felt as though if someone reviews the type and then perhaps reviews it with thoughtfulness, they probably, at that point in time, they would say, well, here's what I would like to read. Ask this gentleman, having thought about what he's responded to. In other words, second or third reflection.
But unfortunately, the interviewer's not going to get that opportunity.
It's
gonna be
unfortunate all over the
right
marketplace,
there.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
A couple things on your resume. Michael,
Okay.
my question here is about the order in which you want to project these things.
Yes.
You talked to me about communications and broadcasting media as kind of your first couple, and I'm interpreting that as your order of priority, your order of how you view your orders of strength.
Yes.
I want these to line up with that. to support that, to reinforce that. This is kind of a nice nebulous little marketing phrase. Down here, you start getting into some specifics.
Right, this
I'm
is
suggesting-
motivational.
Yeah.
If I could have put one thing outside of here, which I did, but it doesn't fit in the format, it would say highlights of marketing communication, motivational, and then the rest of it is 1, 2, 3, 4 bullets.
Think about leading off with bullets that support your first couple of things here,
I
and
think
moving this
kind
down.
of if you think chronologically, you start out. My presentation on the tape started out with achievement orientation. I gave some background. on
Yeah,
how you
but this doesn't.
excellent organizational, high energy, performance capabilities, persistence, proficiency in market analysis and projection, expertise in managerial intuition, and diplomacy and sensitive negotiations. It's kind of motivational. Then the background, extensive background,
Right,
communications,
right.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
These are just questions where I was focusing on
Yes.
these 4 bullets where I was asking you questions about
Okay.
these also. That isn't.
Yes. Okay.